Moral philosophical approach is one of the oldest approaches that is as old as the classical Greeks and Roman literary critics. It incorporates moral values across curriculum as mentioned by Rashid et al. 2010. It describes or evaluates a work in terms of the values and ideas it contains. Now let's move on to the principles or tenets of this approach. The first one is that it suggests that the larger purpose of literature is to teach morality and to probe philosophical issues, not only to tell a story. So, literature should not just tell a story, but it should also teach or instruct readers, as well as to examine thoroughly the philosophical issues found where it will inculcate morality on them. So a text is considered good if it leads to understand our inner emotions. The second one is it does not view literature strictly as art, which is devoid of any moral implications. Like what Horace contends, literature should be delightful and instructive, which means that it should not only bring enjoyment, but should also teach readers about life. It can affect readers either subtly or directly and can influence the lives of others in a significant way. The next one is it focuses on discovering morals while reading a certain literary text, as Wang in MB 2007 as cited in Rashid et al. 2010. And it seeks to find the worthiness of moral and philosophical considerations behind one's reading. Because of the fact that it brings awareness on the readers and it allows them to lead better lives as well as enhancing their understanding of the world. These moral philosophical values that they can find are significant since it would teach and enlighten them. The next one is students have to go beyond the text for moral and philosophical inference. This means that students should not just read the text plainly or analyze the physical structure of the literary text, but they should go beyond from that. Students have to determine the moral and philosophical values that are embedded in that literary text. So it challenges readers to dig deeper, discover moral principles, and ask questions instead of accepting things as they appear. It implies that messages as well as the manner in which it is presented in a text are essential. So teachers can direct students and help them to achieve self-realization as well as self-understanding while interpreting literary works. The next one is it presents an obvious moral philosophy such as determining the theme. For example, Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, it illustrates the moral superiority of the sexually indulgent Tom, whose humanity, honor, and tender-heartedness lift him above the oh-so-proper real sinners in the novel, the vicious and the hypocritical. The next one, it concerns with the content and values that are embedded in the text, which can also be applied in the reader's lives. And lastly, it does not only concern on discovering the meaning, but also if the works of literature are true and significant.
In the study conducted by Rashid et al. 2010, it was found out that the moral philosophical approach, together with the information-based approach, is the most preferred approach in the literature classroom. The moral philosophical approach is advantageous in raising students' awareness of values derived from the text and allowing teachers to include moral values into their teachings. However, critics have pointed out the disadvantages or weaknesses of this approach. This approach is thought to be too judgmental. As mentioned, the focus or goal of this approach is to discover moral values while reading a specific text. This means that the only emphasis is on the moral or philosophical context of the text. For example, if a poem is using the classroom, so using this approach, the structure, the aesthetic use of language, the form, and the style are not given attention, and the main focus is on the poem's message, lesson, and how it affects or impacts the readers. This is a weakness of moral philosophical approach because some believe that literature should be judged primarily on its artistic merits rather than its moral or philosophical content.
Literary character depiction is another example of an activity in which the moral approach can be applied. In this activity, students can act out their favorite characters from literary works that highlight various moral themes. It could be a character from their favorite short stories, fairy tales, fables, or novels. This will allow them to describe their chosen characters, explain what they liked about the personality of the character, and explain how they can relate to them. Understanding the character's actions and characteristics helps improve their overall understanding of the morals of a story. In other words, allowing them to portray the roles of the characters in a story can effectively imprint the underlying moral in their minds than simply telling them the moral in sentences. It will show them an actual path rather than an interpretation.
Share to you the summary of The Life of Cardo by Amador T. Daggio. So, Cardo was the fear of the mothers. Although he was terrible and ugly, he had a very nice way with babies. The babies did not smile at their own fathers or mothers as they smiled at Cardo. That was why the parents were afraid of him. In fact, they hated him that he might steal their babies. When Cardo was passing by, the baby in the arms of his mother looked at him and smiled at him. The mother was wondering why her baby was so suddenly restless. She looked around and saw gnarled and distorted, ugly Cardo. She was frightened and screamed so loud that her husband, who was sleeping, woke up. The father ran up to Cardo and began beating him with bamboo. Cardo did not return the blows. He tried to protect himself with his arms, but his head and breast were bleeding. Cardo told the narrator the tale of his life, a tale filled with mysteries of life, full of passion and desire, and yet of sweetness. Cardo emphasized that he was a seeker for the truth of life. He wanted to know what life is and what's so good and so beautiful about life that we can never know. What view of life does this story present? The story presents a point of view of a man who experienced cruelty just because of how he looks, and it also shows that the world will treat you differently depending on how beautiful or ugly you are. And what does the story say about the nature of good or evil? To the people in the story, they think that Cardo is a brother of the devil just because of his physical appearance. Basically, they call Cardo a devil because of his ugly face. So, what does this story say about the human nature? It is very evident in the story that people could easily judge you without knowing your true personality and intentions. So, what is the moral of the story? The moral of the story is that size, color, and identity of a person should not be the basis for us to treat someone poorly, because kindness should be given to everyone fairly.